Chapter 11. Azerick nearly stabbed Bran when his friend came up from behind and grabbed his arm. "Damn it, Bran! Warn a guy when you're going to sneak up on him the day after he narrowly escaped certain torture and death at the hands of severely irate slavers." "I'll try to remember. Listen, Andrea wasn't there last night." "I know, Bran. I'm sorry. But we might still be able to find her. Maybe she's being held in a different building in the city, or was sold to some rich guy as a maid or something. No, listen to me. I talked to some of the people we freed last night. A couple of them remember her because she spit in the eyes of a few of the slavers and managed to kick one between the legs so hard he walked hunched over for 2 days. They took her and a bunch of others away the same night the ones we rescued were brought in. They overheard the slavers talking about a ship sailing to Baktaran." Bran shook Azerick by his shoulders. "Don't you see? I know where she is. We can find her now." Azerick wanted to be excited along with his best friend, but what he said numbed him. "Bran, Baktaran is a major slave city 1,000 miles to the south. Even the king of Samara cannot control the emir of that city. So what am I supposed to do? Just leave her there? Forget about her, give up on her, and go on with my life?" Azerick felt the bile rise in his throat the instant he answered. "Yes. You have no money, no skills other than stealing bread and lifting a purse, and no knowledge of anything outside of Southport. You can barely read Valerian. Do you think you can just start walking south or hop a ship, show up in Baktaran like some knight errant rescuing the princess, and live happily ever after? You'll be dead within a week, and that is if you are lucky. You will starve in a month, or end up a slave, digging in a Samaran mine." Azerick did not see the blow coming. The next thing he was aware of was the clouds gliding lazily across the sky. It took him a moment to realize what had caused the sudden change in his orientation. He tongued a loose tooth and tasted blood in his mouth. "Ow! Now help me back up, you savage," Azerick said, and extended his hand toward Bran. Bran clasped Azerick's wrist and pulled him back onto his feet. "You know, you've gotten exceedingly violent recently, and coming from me, that should frighten you more than a little." "I'm sorry." "No, you're not. All right. Let's figure out how to give you at least a small chance of getting there alive and not in shackles. I will give you my crossbow and whatever coin I have, which is terribly meager as you well know. However, I may be able to get you an honest ship going south." "That sounds better." "No, I am sorry I hit you." "You should be, you cretin. We'll go talk to Peg and see if we can get you on a boat. You better hope like hell I do not lose my tooth, or I may end up in Baktaran just to return the favor." "In that case, maybe I should hit you again." "Unless you want to swim all the way to Samara, I would not recommend it." The two young men walked into Peg's shipping supply store. "Peg, I need your help again," Azerick said without preamble upon entering the shop.
Why am I not surprised? You sure be calling in a lot of favors you ain't even earned yet."
"Yeah, I seem to be spreading my credit around pretty thick lately. Don't worry, this one does not cost you anything either. This is Bran. We need to find him work on a ship that is going south, preferably as far as Baktaran." Peg looked Bran up and down.
Hmm. Might be I can put the word out and find him a boat that needs hands,"
Peg said, rubbing his grizzled shin. "I know he does not look like much, but he is a decent sort, when he's not punching me in the face. Reasonably bright, and he is reliable."
"I know a ship that does a fair bit of trading in Samara and travels that far south, though I don't rightly understand why anyone would want to be looking for passage to that den of wickedness,"
Peg said, with a sour look. "You remember the girl I was talking about yesterday? We found out she was taken to Baktaran, and Bran is intent on finding her and bringing her home."
"She must really mean a lot to risk going after her down there."
"She does, at least to me," Bran replied. Azerick was not sure if Bran intended his answer to be a slight against his decision not to go, but it still stabbed like a knife twisting in his gut.
"All right,"
Peg said.
"Bran, you stay here with me, and I'll give you a crash course in knot tying and the basic rules of sailing, so you're not a completely useless landlubber. I'll go have a word with the captain of the ship I got in mind later. Don't worry, lad, he ain't due to ship out till tomorrow. You won't miss your ride,"
Peg said, as fear flashed plainly across Bran's face. "Do you need me to get anything for you, Bran?" Azerick asked. His friend shook his head. "Everything I have of any worth is either on me or waiting for me in Baktaran." "All right. I will leave you here with Peg for now. I have a few things you might be able to use. I'll go get them and bring them back. Bran nodded, and Azerick left to go and retrieve a few things from his home. The sudden turn of events made Azerick forget the need for caution as he made his way back to the squatter's district and dropped through the hidden trapdoor in the tanner's shop. He returned to the surface several minutes later with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder and the crossbow tucked under an arm. Hidden eyes watched his hasty return and departure for the second time that day, then returned to the burned-out building the street rat had vanished into and reappeared from a few minutes later. The watcher decided the tannery was more important right now than following the boy, and went to take a closer look at the building as Azerick quickly passed out of sight. Azerick returned to Peg's store with his burden and found Bran sitting on the floor amidst a pile of short ropes with various knots tied in them. Peg sat on a stool nearby, giving him instructions. "That's it, boy. You got most of the sailor's hitches down. Reach over and grab that round timber over there, and I'll show you how to make a stopper hitch and a weaver's hitch," Peg was saying as Azerick entered the store. Peg looked up at Azerick as he entered. "If I can trust you two lads to march my store, I'll go see about getting young Bran here a berthing. If anybody stops in, tell him I'll be back in an hour."
"Don't worry, we got it,"
Azerick assured him.
"I never thought there were so many types of knots,"
Bran said, throwing down a length of rope with an intricately designed knot tied in the center of it.
"I brought you that crossbow I promised,"
Azerick said as he slipped the bag from his shoulder and set it down next to Bran.
"There are about a half-dozen quarrels in the quiver. I did not have much ammunition made for it, since it was a trap. I also have a coat and a spare set of clothes that are too big for me anyway. I scrounged up what few coins I had. They're in a small pouch in the bag with the clothes."
Bran looked at the weapon and bag sitting across from him. "Thanks. I'm glad you could at least spare that." Azerick felt the familiar stab of pain Bran's knife brought.
"Look, Bran, I'm sorry I cannot go with you. It's just that something tells me that going with you to rescue Andrea is not what I'm supposed to be doing. I wish I could explain it, but I can't. I feel like something is pulling me in another direction. Andrew said he felt that fate or something had its hooks in me. I don't know. I just know I'm not supposed to go with you. And if I deny the fate or whatever it is, then my going may just make things worse."
Bran looked up, his face flushed with either anger or shame. "I know. Anyone who has spent time with you can feel it. It's weird. It's just that you're the one who always has a plan. No matter how crazy something is or how bad the odds are, you're the one who figures a way out of it, or something completely random happens that lets you figure out an answer. I'm afraid, Azerick. I'm afraid because I'm not as smart or as lucky as you. You know all these things, and whenever you are around, things just seem to happen. And no matter how screwed up it is, you always find a way out. I love her, and I'm afraid I don't have what it takes to save her. I don't have the fates or the gods or whatever looking out for me like you do. I'm just a street rat. A useless street rat. You are not useless, and maybe the fates are watching you, guiding you to do this. How many people would even attempt to do what you are doing? Anyone who would risk their life, and worse, is special. Special enough for the gods to take notice." "Thanks, Az. I hope you are right. For her sake." Peg came back in less than half an hour.
"I got your boat, boy, but you better be prepared to work for it. Captain Zeb don't put up with no slackers or boys who can't follow orders."
Bran jumped to his feet. "I'll work hard and do what I'm told, Peg. I swear."
"I know, and that's what I've told him. Zeb's an honest man. He'll do right by you and get you where you need to go. It ain't a straight run, mind you. This ain't no passenger boat. The ship's gotta hit North Haven before sailing down to Langdon's Crossing, and only then is she sailing for Bactaran. But it will still be a far sight quicker than any landbound caravan."
"Thank you, Peg. When do I leave?"
"Zeb says he'll take you on right now. He can use some strong hands to finish loading up the stuff they're running to North Haven."
Bran turned to Azerick. "I guess I better be leaving then. I'm going to find her, Az. I know you will. I can feel it. I will see you both when you get back." Bran picked up his things, turned, and walked out the door, headed for his own destiny. Azerick was already walking after him, but stopped with his hand on the door handle. His heart urged him to keep walking, to go with his friend to rescue Andrea. But something else, something profound and hidden deep within the shadows of his soul stopped him. "Go to hell," Azerick growled. Peg raised a bushy salt and pepper eyebrow at his vehemence. Not you, Peg," Azerick said. "Oh, I know who you meant, and I'll warn you to watch your tongue, lest they decide to meet you down there one day." "Thank you for everything, Peg. I will pay you back one day for what you have done for me."
The old sailor scowled at the dejected young man. "They say a good deed is its own reward, and anyone who expects to be paid back for a good deed ain't done any good. Maybe you'll be in a position to help old Peg out some day, and if you are, then you'll do him a good turn for the sake of doing it, not for some sense of obligation."
Azerick nodded at Peg's sage advice and walked morosely out of the store and toward his home. He did not have a copper to his name and had nothing to eat but a handful of beans, but he was not in the mood to go foraging today. Instead, he took a direct route back to his lair and spent the next few hours wondering if he had done the right thing. Was it really the pull of destiny stopping him from going, or was he simply a coward? Azerick was confident he was no coward, but if the gods had taken an interest in him, why was his life filled with so much misery and pain? What kind of destiny required him to lose everyone he got close to? Azerick finally dropped off into restless slumber and dreamed a dreamless sleep. He awoke the next morning to a rumbling stomach and cotton mouth with nothing to satisfy either one. The beans were dry and would take hours to cook, and the water jug had a crack that left only a long, narrow trail of wet stones leading to a larger crack in the floor, where the runnel had made its final escape. Azerick pulled out the loose stone in the wall, where he secreted whatever coins he managed to earn or steal, but upon gazing at the empty niche, he remembered that he had given the last of them to Bran. His stomach ordered him to get moving with a growl that would brook no disobedience. He left through the warehouse entrance and headed for one of his more favorite market squares. The square was at a large intersection where many of the city's workers, both private and governmental, crossed through on their way to work. Bakers and other food vendors crowded into the square, often coming to blows for the best corner to put up their stalls, alternately shouting out the quality and low prices of their victuals and condemning the cost and inferiority of the morsels sold by their competitors. Azerick tried to blend in with the crowd and position himself next to one of the more crowded displays, but every time he insinuated himself into a cluster of people, they immediately gravitated away from him. He felt like a beekeeper moving toward a hive with a smoked pot, constantly driving the bees away from him so he could collect the valuable honey. That was all well and good for a beekeeper, but Azerick needed the crowd to stick together for him to filch a bit of food to eat. When his stomach rumbled powerfully once again, he decided he was going to just have to do a snatch and run, hoping the proprietor would not see him or care enough to raise too much a fuss. His luck was off today. He could feel it. The way things were going, the crowd would resume their normal pressing mass the moment he struck, which would allow a watchman or the baker to grab him and beat him. Azerick's stomach ordered him to stop whining and get down to business. He walked casually toward the stand, where numerous freshly baked loaves of bread were stacked on the table and sticking up out of baskets, filling the air of the market with their mouth-watering aromas. His stomach ordered him to move with haste. Azerick sidled up to the table, ready to grab a large round loaf of black bread, when the baker looked right at him. "What are you doing here? Why did you have to pick my booth? Go on, take the bread and be gone with you. Nobody's going to want to come to my stand now, defiler." The street rat looked at the baker in confusion, then glanced over his shoulder as the crowd moved away, muttering, "Beware Death's shadow. Do not let his shadow be cast upon you, or you will die." "I'll die who get near him. We may all die now." "What are you people talking about?" Azerick shouted. "Cursed! He is cursed to lose everyone he befriends." "I'm not cursed. What are you talking about?" "His family is all dead. Friends all dead. He is cursed. Cursed by the hand of Sherilon." "He is the hand of Sherilon, delivering her touch of death to all who get near. I am not cursed. I am not the hand of death," he shouted, but the crowd drew away from him and continued their droning. Azerick grabbed the loaf of bread from the table, casting a glare at the baker and everyone around him. He half expected the baker to change his mind and demand that Azerick pay for the bread, but his face had gone purple. Black splotches stood out against the plum-colored flesh, and his tongue protruded, swollen and blackened, like a plague victim. The street rat threw down the loaf and ran, The street-clogging populace parted like the water at the bow of a swift-moving vessel to let him pass.
Beware Death's shadow, beware the hand of Sherrilon.
The people's mantra continued, following him, chasing him like a swarm of relentless bees, trying to drive him away from their hive, their chanting, a mimicry of the bees' angry buzzing. Azerick found himself near the docks and burst into Peg's shop, not knowing where else to go. "Peg, what is going on around here?"
"Now, why did you have to come back here, lad?"
Peg asked, as his face purpled and black splotches began spreading across his visage.
"Hasn't old Peg treated you right since he met you? Ain't he done nothing but help you?"
"Of course, Peg, I know you have. What's wrong?"
"Then why'd you have to come back and kill me? Look at me, boy. Already your foul curse is on me. You killed me, boy. You killed me sure as sure. Go on now, and let me die in peace."
"No, Peg!" Azerick wailed. "I did not want you to die. I did not mean to."
"Meaning don't mean nothing when you're dead. Go on now. I can't hardly talk no more."
Peg slurred around his swollen, blackened tongue. Azerick ran from the store and sprinted down the harbor front, past the long piers and moored ships, until he saw a ship with someone he recognized, shuffling about on the deck. "Bran!" Azerick called out as he ran the length of the long dock. "Bran, you haven't left yet. I don't know what's going on. Everyone is acting strange and dying. I think the plague has come to Southport. We need to get out of here." His friend turned toward him, his face already showing the signs of death. "It's no plague, Az. It's you. You are the plague. I was too slow. Everyone on the ship is dead already. I suppose it doesn't matter now anyway. Andrea is long dead, killed by your curse when she met you, just like the rest of us." "No, I did not kill her. It's not my fault." "Yes, it is. Do you know why she was out the night the slavers took her?" Azerick shook his head. "Her father put his hands on her again. He did that sometimes when he was really drunk. Just his hands. They fought, and she ran off even though she knew it was dangerous." "No, no, no!" Azerick moaned, not wanting to hear it. "You could have kept her safe, Az. You knew what it was like for her. But you kept your nice, safe little haven all to yourself. You were safe from the depredations of the city above. You let her die. Your selfishness let her die. It's not my fault!" Azerick vehemently denied. "I could not keep her safe. I could never keep those around me safe. They all died. Mother, father, John, and the others, they all died." "Now you begin to see. Everyone around you dies. Your family died because you are cursed, and Andrea died because you were a coward, because you were too much of a coward to try to keep her safe. Better to let others take her. That way you would not feel the weight of responsibility. Your conscience could become clear. She would be dead, but you could deny culpability. But you know the truth. You know it was your fault." Azerick barely heard Bran's last words. His thoughts were echoing inside his head too loudly for him to focus upon his friend. "I could not keep her safe. I could never keep those around me safe. They all died. Mother, father, John, and the others, they all died. They all died because I did not keep them safe. I may not have been able to save father, but I should have been there for mother, John, and the others, and Andrea," he said, talking to himself as he left Bran behind. Azerick awoke in a cold sweat, somehow knowing it was not the nightmare that woke him. Someone was coming. He heard the trapdoor hidden beneath the burnt-out timbers of the tanner's shop open, then a sudden cry, and the thump of a body hitting the stone. He sprang out of bed, grabbed his knife, and prepared to defend his home. If the gods cursed him, then his enemies would suffer under the spell of his shadow as well. He would make certain of it. Half a dozen men surrounded the trapdoor and the burned-out remains of what appeared to have once been a tannery. All 6 men were slavers, and normally would have been hunting the streets for valuable targets on this moonless night. Instead, they had followed Kalish, one of their own who claimed he knew where one of the men, or boys as it turned out, lived. The man in charge of the slave ring had put out a very sizable reward for the capture of whoever it was that had cost them a fortune by freeing their last shipment of slaves and making them all look foolish. Kalish had been with a group that had chased the boy into the squatter's district before losing him thanks to the help of what many thought was the thieves' guild. Kalish had not gone back to the warehouse, now rendered useless by the infiltrator's knowledge of his existence. Instead, he had stuck around the dilapidated ward, hoping to find where the boy had gone to ground. Kalish was an experienced thief out of Bakhtaran, and knew they had chased the young intruder to his warren like hounds running a fox back to its den. It was as much luck as skill that led him close enough to the hidden entrance to let him spy the street rat sneaking away the next day. The boy was cautious and far from inept. The fact he was still alive testified to some measure of skill. But he was not a real thief, like Kalish was. The swarthy skinned, hook-nosed Samaran knew there was no need to follow the boy throughout the city, although he easily could have without detection. It was simpler to wait for the boy, who used far less caution than he should have, to return and pinpoint the location of the trapdoor for Kalish. Kalish considered ambushing the lad inside his own home, but he could not be certain if there were others living inside. He was confident the boy was not a member of the local guild, despite their apparent interference. Still, entering another's lair by oneself was unwise, so he decided to let a few of his closest cohorts in on the plan. He would take half the reward and split the remainder between the others. It was still very profitable, much more so than if he had foolishly told the entire company. Telling the boss directly was even more foolish. The thieving bastard would have simply ordered everyone down the hole and not paid out at all. The way in is under here, Kalish told his group. Rahim, you go first, and we'll follow you down. Rahim lowered himself into the dark hole, climbing down the metal rungs of the ladder bolted to the stone wall of the shaft. He had only descended a few steps when the ladder rung suddenly pulled out in his hand. Rahim's stomach lurched with a terrifying sense of falling. He reached out desperately to grab onto another rung as he plummeted into the darkness, but his weight pulled the slick rung out of his hand. The slaver did not know what struck him when he hit the floor below, but his entire body convulsed and contorted as waves of agonizing electricity created by the magical ward Azerick had managed to reproduce coursed through his body. Kalish heard Rahim's body strike the ground, and was glad he decided to let the fellow Samaran be the first to descend. He had never liked Rahim, and figured that if the boy trapped his lair, as he himself certainly would have, then let Rahim find the first one. Be careful, and watch for more traps, Kalish told the others. Jonah went next, followed by Kalish and the others. Jonah climbed carefully down the ladder, reaching with his leg when he came to the missing rung. The next step was slick and coated in grease or animal fat. Jonah supported most of his weight with his arms, until he was able to get his feet firmly on the next step and avoid touching the slick rung with his hands. He saw where the missing rung slipped into a slot in the sides of the ladder. It let a person step on it without incident, but the moment they leaned back, it slid right out of the slot. The bar itself dangled from a stout cord against the wall, just a few inches in front of his face. He was only 2 rungs from reaching the bottom, just 3 feet above where Rahim lay, when the step moved. The rung only shifted a fraction of an inch, but that was enough to pull the cord that disappeared into a crack in the wall, which pulled the trigger of the crossbow hidden behind it. The slap of the cord striking the steel bow heralded the death of Jonah. The former slaver dropped the last few feet, landing atop Rahim, with a quarrel protruding from his side, just below the armpit. Bah! 2 men dead, and they had not even reached the dense floor. The gods only knew how large this place was. It could cover half the damned city for all he knew. The first flickering doubts began to fill Kalish's mind. Maybe he had better go back and tell the others? No, it was just one street rat, he was certain. They would just have to be more careful. Now the rest of you, watch what you're doing, the Sumerian hissed up the shaft. Kalish grabbed the sides of the ladder with his hands and the insides of his feet, slid the rest of the way to the floor, and then motioned the others to follow him the same way. One after another, the 3 men slid to the bottom and joined the Sumerian in the gloomy passage, looking warily for signs of any more traps. Kalish could hear the men's fear in their breathing as they all stared up the dimly lit passage. A luminous fungus grew on the walls, adding a small amount of bluish light to the dim, yellow light of an oil lamp with its wick turned down, placed at what appeared to be a 4-way intersection, perhaps 30 yards ahead. Death awaits all who enter here, an eerie voice whispered down the passage. Flee! Run while you can, body thieves! You vile purveyors of flesh! Run!
Kalish's men looked ready to do just that, until he froze them with a glare, promising a knife in the back of the first man to flee.
It is just a boy playing tricks with you,
He growled at his men.
I know who you are, boy. I know your face. It is you who had better run if you can.
Laughter, more disconcerting than the eerie whispers had been, filled the dank passage. Only Kalish's unspoken threat kept the men behind him from running away and fleeing back up the ladder. Azerick watched the first man who attempted to climb down the treacherous ladder strike the ground, landing on the ward he had created. The narrow, secret passage behind the wall hid far more traps, ready to unleash their hidden death upon anyone unfortunate enough to find their triggers. After the second slaver set off the crossbow and dropped atop his associate, Azerick's fear of the intrusion became anger, then a grim sort of amusement. When the dark-skinned man threatened him, after hearing his spooky warning, Azerick could not help but laugh at the fear the man tried desperately to conceal. His friends were even worse at hiding their emotions than their leader was. He could smell the sweat rolling off their normally pungent bodies. Fear sweat had an altogether different odor to it than the stale stench of poor hygiene. Azerick watched through small holes in the wall, revealed by simply pulling out stones, not mortared in place. He saw the swarthy man take the lead and move like a man who knew something about the art of thievery and trap settings. His movements reminded him of the way the guild thieves moved, carefully and precisely, spotting and avoiding the trigger plates that would spell his death. It was obvious this man was too skilled to trip any of the traps hidden along the floor, so Azerick was going to have to take a more direct course of action. When Kalish stepped past another trigger plate, Azerick simply pulled the trigger on the crossbow himself. With a speed and agility that shocked Azerick, the man dropped to the floor as the bolt clattered off the wall just above his head. Cursing, Azerick grabbed the handle of a short spear and thrust it through a murder hole in the wall, stabbing the man directly behind Kalish low in his side. Azerick drew the spear back and stabbed again as the man cried out in pain, but was silenced by the second thrust piercing his left lung. The other two men behind him shouted in terror and turned to run, despite Kalish and his threats. Before they could move, Azerick was already tugging on a rope near the bottom of the wall that ran through a pair of pulleys before disappearing again into the ceiling. The tether pulled the stoppers from two clay jugs filled with lamp oil. The oil poured through the cracks in the ceiling and rained over the two men at the rear of what was left of the raiding party. Slipping in the oil, the two men turned and sprinted back toward the metal ladder.
Stop, you fools, or he'll kill you both!
Kalish shouted at the fleeing men, but his words fell on deaf ears. With their shoes soaked in oil, climbing back up the ladder was proving difficult. Shins banged into the metal rungs as their feet slipped, but fear lent strength to their arms, and they managed to pull themselves up. Just below the empty space where the slip bar dangled, a square hole appeared in front of the lead slaver to reveal an angry pair of hazel-green eyes, lit by the yellow light of a lamp. The eyes vanished as quickly as they appeared. Azerick thrust a flaming brand through the opening in front of him, igniting the intruder's oil-soaked clothing. The slaver emitted a terrible keening as his garments burst into flames. In his terror, he released his hold on the ladder and fell right onto his partner, desperately trying to clamber up the ladder past him, setting his own combustible clothing aflame. Both men fell screaming as twin flailing balls of fire landing in a writhing, screeching pile upon the corpses of Jonah and Rahim. Kalish pressed his hands over his ears in an attempt to block out the horrible screams the men made as they flailed about on the floor for 1 or 2 agonizing minutes before they finally fell silent. Kalish's nerves were worn to breaking point. He knew he could not flee. The hellspawn of a boy would not let him. He would not leave this place alive unless he killed him. He focused his thoughts and knew he could do this.
Do you think you have won, boy? Those men were all fools, but I am no fool. I am of the Faslum fi Sarik, the most feared group of thieves and assassins in all of Sumara. I will not fall for your tricks. I will find you and I will gut you. To the abyss with a reward. Delivering your corpse with the skin fillet from your body will be my reward. Do you hear me, boy? I am Kalish, and I swear this to you.
Kalish ignored the deranged laughter reverberating from behind the wall and echoing through the passageways. He knew where the boy was hiding now, and that would allow him to avoid his tricks and traps. Then he would find him
and drag him out of his little cubbyhole. Kalish was so wrapped up in his thoughts of vengeance, he almost missed the obvious trigger plate just below his hovering foot. Kalish smiled and extended his leg beyond the trap, marveling how those other fools would probably have stepped right on the thing that was so obvious to his darkness-attuned eyes. His world exploded in a brilliant flash of pain as his foot fell through the floor. What had looked to be solid stone was nothing more than fired clay, painted and weathered to look exactly like the stone surrounding it. Kalish's foot dropped through the shattered clay cover and tripped the spring-loaded steel jaws waiting beneath. Steel teeth pierced his soft flesh and grated against the bone, but it was inaudible over his cries of agony. The slaver looked through tear-blurred eyes as the boy emerged from the shadows of the passage ahead, like a cold and remorseless wraith coming to exact his revenge. "Who are you?" Kalish shouted past the tears of pain. "I am the Hand of Sharalon, and you are caught in my shadow," the boy said as he scooped up the curved sword Kalish had dropped. Kalish stared in horror as the boy's shadow, dimly cast by the flickering lamp just ahead, draped itself across his pinioned form. He let out one final scream before the boy drew back the blade and swung it forward with all his might, silencing him for all eternity. Azerick stared emotionlessly at the head that rolled to his feet, staring up at him wide-eyed, with a look of horror permanently etched upon his face. He tossed the sword aside and began the grisly task of dragging the 6 corpses to the sewer entrance of his lair, one by one, and tossing them into the filthy water, where they would probably find their way into the harbor in a few days, less if it rained heavily. "At least my financial situation has improved," Azerick said to himself, as he stared at the small pile of coins and valuables laid out on the table in front of him. "You want me to be the Hand of Sharalon, the Reaper's shadow?" Azerick shouted at the ceiling and the gods, supposedly living far above. "I will be your hand, goddess of death. I will be your hand against everyone who threatens me or those close to me. I will send you so many vile, tainted souls, you will have to open up another circle of hell to keep them all in." Outside, high above the city of Southport, the low rumble of thunder echoed across the dark, cloudless sky.